Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the RP Book Club. Happy podcast day. I'm thrilled to be back with another urban fantasy novel for you this month, and to be joined by its fantastic author, Claire Light, who writes under her urban fantasy alter ego, Jadie Jang. We had a fantastic chat about her book, Monkey Around, as well as themes like multicultural and queer representation, urban fantasy tropes, and she gives an incredible list of some stellar book recommendations. Don't forget that you can get 20% off the paperback and ebook when you buy from the Rebellion Publishing webshop. To do that this month, your code is ABC-21-MO. I really hope you all enjoy the episode as much as I enjoyed recording it, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show, what you like, if there's anything you don't like. Feel free to drop us a tweet at Rebellion Pub or send an email to publishing.press@rebellion.co.uk. Claire Light, who writes as Jadie Jang, is almost as organisy as her characters. In her time, she studied a magazine and an arts festival with a cast of Asian Pacific Americans even more magical, if less supernatural, than the ones you'll find in Monkey Around. She was led into a serious urban fantasy addiction when her already autoimmune disease body threw a 7-year-long tantrum, and a dozen or so Eurocentric mythology-dominated urban fantasy series later, she sat up and said, I can do this. And do this she absolutely can. Claire, a very warm welcome to the RP Book Club.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to be able to talk to you. I've read Monkey Around maybe 3 times now. I reread it last night and I'm completely obsessed. I can't get it out of my head. It's so good.
Well, thank you for reading. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
To start with, tell me a little bit more about your writing alter ego. Was there a particular reason you wanted to write under a pseudonym, or was that compartmentalization just how the creative process works for you?
Yeah, there was a specific reason. I call it categorization because I do have 2 different ways of writing. And I have published work under Claire Light as well. But it's more that I feel like the different types of writing are coming from different places and going to different places as well. Claire Light stories, I published a book of short stories called Slightly Behind and to the Left. Claire Light stories are very what I call cold universe. They're not a happy place. They're not a place you'd like to visit, but they are very interesting. And the process by which I arrive at these stories is very different. It's much more of a blind process where I sort of connect my conscious mind with my subconscious and let whatever, mud soaked, darkness, that process dredges up, come out onto the page, and I just let it be. And some of it, some people are shocked by. I'm sometimes shocked by what comes out. Jadie Jang is a sort of a anglicization, I don't even know the word, of my Chinese name, is a much more warm universe, happy ending-ish kind of stories that sort of focuses on the ways that people come together and help each other. Although there is some darkness in those worlds as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Some, shall we say, some very shadowy darkness without getting too spoilery. Yeah, that's really interesting, sort of looking at relationships and how different people interact. I was kind of thinking as I was going and reading the book this most recent time that we look at relationships in different ways. So we touch a very little bit on those kind of potentially romantic relationships and then pull back from that. Urban fantasy often has a lot of love triangles or romantic things in there. And I would say we're a step removed from that. Was that a deliberate choice to kind of turn down the volume on that kind of storyline?
Not at all. It wasn't a deliberate choice. I'm hoping to turn this into a series. So I'm hoping to be able to explore at least one of these potential romances
I'm hoping
in
for that
more
too.
depth. Definitely. And also, this probably, I'm just realizing as you said it right now, this probably reflects my own experience where I'm much more of a dance in, dance out kind of person when it comes to romance. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, now you say it, that completely makes sense. And I've got to ask, which side do you fall on? Are you Team Todd or are you Team Tez?
well, I'm the only person who can't answer that publicly
I thought you might
because
say
it would
that, but I had to try.
because first of all, you can't play favorites with the children, but
Mm,
also if I happened to have a sense of where the story was going in the future, I wouldn't want to spoil it. So
yeah. Oh, well, for the record, I think I'm Team Todd.
I think a lot of people are Team Todd. Todd is really showing himself to great advantage in this book, and
Mm.
Tez maybe not so much.
I suspect that if we see more, Todd might show some other sides, show some other colors coming through.
Yeah.
So that'll be really interesting. But yeah,
There's
for
definitely
now,
more
Team
to
Todd.
Todd. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and as far as the Todd thing, I'll just hint that two tricksters in a romance together might not always be the best idea. I don't know. We'll see.
And that's good advice for both urban fantasy and life.
Yes.
Maya very much struggles with a sense of not belonging and not really feeling comfortable in her identity. Is that
Mhm.
something that you've struggled with in your life?
Absolutely. I made Maya look like and believe that she is and move through the world as a mixed race person
Mm.
because I am a mixed race person um, and that's my experience. And I wanted to use her to talk about that experience to a certain extent. She's not just a mixed race person; she's also a transracial adoptee, having been adopted by a couple who are white, and she's obviously thinks that she's mixed,
Mhm.
Asian and white, may or may not be. But her experience is very much not being entirely of one thing or the other. And then added on top of that, I escalated that in the fiction by making her, literally an orphan who
Yep.
doesn't know her origins. So that's just a way of sort of exaggerating the feeling of not belonging that can come from being mixed race. Now, granted, my own feeling of not belonging growing up also came from the fact that we moved around a great
Mm.
deal. So I was always the new kid in school. But people looking askance at you on the street, constantly whispering about you. Um, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so
Mm.
and I'm a member of what's now known as the multiracial baby boom, because there was a sudden explosion of multiracial kids in the aftermath of the civil rights movement on the one hand, and in the states Immigration Act of 1965, which
Mhm.
opened the floodgates to non-European immigration. And so in the wake of that, there was just this huge Gen X boom, baby boom
Mm.
of multiracials. And So when I was a kid, there was no mainstream conception of multiraciality. People didn't know what I was. They didn't know what to call me. And I was constantly being questioned in the street. And when my generation came of age, they kind of developed a whole academic field to study multiraciality. So yeah, we are the generation that sort of has defined multiraciality and has had to define it for ourselves, to define it for the public, to define it for the mainstream. That having been said, I'm middle aged. I'm Gen X, and we already have an entire generation of millennials who are publishing work, and then Gen Z is already starting to publish work, and there still isn't all that much fiction about the multiracial experience. So I wanted to do something fun. I wanted to take some of these tropes that are out there and that are just there for the taking, and apply them to the multiracial experience. So that's where I know it's a lot, but that's where that all comes from.
Oh, completely. And I would imagine that it was really challenging to not have a representation, or to see somebody who looked like you in the books you read and things like that. So I would imagine that it's a powerful thing to be able to do that for younger readers.
I would love it if Maya could be that for younger people. Yeah, definitely. And of course, Maya is, even for me, Maya is part of a lineage. I was talking on another podcast about the martial arts aspect of this, because martial arts pop culture is so important to Asian Americans. And the first fictional character I ever saw, who was the first two fictional characters I ever saw, who were mixed race, Asian and white, were the first one was a character in a Hong Kong kung fu movie, and the second one was David Carradine in Kung Fu in the United States. And both of them were monoracial people pretending to be multiracial. So the one in Hong Kong was a Chinese actor whose hair was bleached orange,
Yeah.
and David Carradine is of course a white actor who was pretending to be multiracial. But both of them were very, very important to me, and they also associated multiraciality, the representation of multiraciality in my mind, with Kung Fu. So
Yeah.
So the empowerment of that is very important to me, and it's fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's why we see Maya with her undeniably kick-ass moves.
Yes, she is a martial artist. Yeah.
And mixing that with just a really beautifully fluid magic system is fantastic. And I was sort of reading a little bit about the mythology behind kind of the story of the Monkey King, and coming to this as a white person, I wasn't really familiar with that. And it was interesting to take a step back and go, okay, well, this is new to me, and I'm sitting here going, wow, this is an incredible magic system, and how did you come up with this, and how does this work, and taking a step back and going, well, this would be really familiar to somebody who knew that mythology, and that would feel quite different. It's a beautiful way to introduce people who don't know about that mythology to it in a new and an agenda bent way, which is always a good thing in my book. Was that part of your intention, to kind of bring that to a new audience?
Absolutely. I'm remembering about 10 or 11 years ago, maybe 12 years ago now, I was at WizCon, which is the big feminist science fiction or speculative fiction convention in the States. And there was a panel talking about, using mythology in fantasy, and, how the mythology used in fantasy is overwhelmingly Western,
Yes.
Western and Western, especially Western European. And what other kinds of mythologies can we use, and blah blah blah. And so someone in the audience brought up the Ramayana, and I immediately thought of Journey to the West, which is sort of the East Asian version, East Asia's answer to the Ramayana, in more ways than one. And the Monkey King actually probably being based on Hanuman, scholars think. Anyway, So I brought that up and described it a little bit, and no one in the room had. I think one person in the room had ever heard of the Monkey King or Journey to the West. Now this was 3 or 4 years before the big tentpole Monkey King movie started coming out of China, but still, it's 13 years later, and it's still very touch and go when I tell people about the story among Americans, whether any of them have ever heard of the Monkey King or not. So for me, it was like, wow, there is this story that like basically every East Asian American knows, but all the Americans around them don't know, and it's a great story to introduce to people. And yeah, I absolutely want this to be people's introduction to Monkey King and Journey to the West. It is the most well-known. The Monkey King is probably the most well-known legendary, mythological figure in the East Asian world, and is almost completely, until about 10 years ago, was almost completely unknown in the United States. Shocking.
Let's go to a reader question. So
Awesome.
we had a couple of readers write in. One of them emailed to ask, what would your form be if you were a shapeshifter?
One of the things about urban fantasy that I absolutely love, particularly this kind of urban fantasy, the female-centered paranormal detective type story, is that it is, for me anyway, the perfect wish fulfillment vehicle for the urban woman, the contemporary urban woman.
Completely.
And when I decided to write my own urban fantasy, I decided to do my own wish fulfillment completely. So yes, I would be Maya. I would be a female Monkey King. Yeah, absolutely. No question.
Amazing. I was going to ask about that, and I was going to go for a way more sort of sideways in about, the fact that we see your own story in the book, and we see, that kind of social justice element, and I was going to ask what character you identify with, but we know now it's Maya.
Well, actually, there are a lot of aspects to Maya that are not like me at all. I am not a prankster. I'm not big on pranks. My sense of humor is completely different from hers. I'm also not a martial artist. I did study martial arts here and there, but I didn't succeed very well at it. She's a very physical person. She's a very prank-driven person. She loves chaos. And I love organizing, and so Maya necessarily has to have a certain organizing side to her character, but I'm definitely, she balances the two. I'm definitely on the organizing side. I do not love chaos. So yes, there are parts of me that are in Maya, but there are parts of me that are in Todd, and there are parts of me that are in Tez as well. So I don't actually identify more with Maya than with the other characters. Insofar as any of the characters come alive, it's because I put a piece of my own life in them. So yeah, she's my wish fulfillment, but she's not necessarily the one I identify with most.
So we see in the book some interaction between the magic world and the human world, notably involving police helicopters, which I just love. Is that something that you would envision there being more of in the future in my story? More sort of interaction between those two still quite separate worlds?
Well, not to spoil, but Maya's the magic versus police helicopter scene was Maya being naughty. She wasn't supposed to do that. She knew she wasn't, and she usually doesn't do stuff like that. So one of the things that this is a trope. This is
Mhm.
absolutely 100% a UF trope. Some urban fantasies take place in a world where magic is open and everybody knows about it, and some of them take place in a world where it's still hidden and has to be kept hidden.
Mm.
And this is one of those worlds in which magic is kept hidden to a certain extent. It's an open secret in some communities.
Mm.
And I took that trope and ran with it as well, because that sort of, you know, open secret kind of keeping things under wraps, but also kind of, you know, either whimsically or even maliciously letting them sort of like bump up against each other in various
Mm.
ways. Um, that is also something that you experience in marginalized communities,
Yeah.
where in a marginalized community there is, you know, the bulk of what happens in that community happens with inside the community, and
Mm-hmm.
no one knows about it. But there are certain aspects of every marginalized community that become cool and ethnic or cool and queer or cool and what have you, and the mainstream will take those aspects up and basically culturally appropriate them.
Yes.
And because there's that kind of push and pull between the more attractive aspects of the culture, of the subculture of a marginalized community and the mainstream, members of that community will sometimes feed aspects to the mainstream, sort of um, it's sort of in a trickstery way,
Mm.
and so basically, you know, I wanted to run with that as a metaphor for the ways in which people in sort of ethnic communities kind of interplay with the mainstream, and particularly in this case where you have people from an ethnic community who are very specifically activists and racial
Mm.
justice activists, especially interacting with representations of authority and a sort of an authoritarian aspect of the government. So, yeah, basically, it's a trope, but I was, you know, making use of the trope, and I keep doing that in this book because it's just so obvious and it's just right there, you know.
It's so delicious.
Yeah, yeah, it lends itself.
Completely, completely. And thinking about that sort of, well, I'm thinking about queerness now. We've mentioned it, and seeing use of neopronouns, so use of the Z/Them pronouns. It's one of those things that really shouldn't be unusual, but kind of is, that is just how things are, and the characters don't question it, and everything is just accepted, that the story is not about, you know, queerness is just present as it is in the world, you know, with all of us. And I think as somebody who's queer myself, it still surprises me when I read a book that features queerness, but it isn't some coming out story, or it's just where it's queer norm, right? Was that something that you always wanted to include, or was that something the character sort of revealed to you as you went along?
Both, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It was I wanted the human community, I wanted the supernatural community to reflect the human community pretty one for one. And I also wanted the human community to reflect my human community and my experience. And queerness is so completely integrated into my own communities. Now, I'm not saying that the entire racial justice community is entirely, you know, integrated with the queer community and seamlessly, and there are no issues and anything like that. That's not the case, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Even in San Francisco, but the communities that I've worked in have been largely queer friendly, and the integration has been largely seamless, and that is and I wanted that to be seen in the book. And the way that you deal with there are essentially, I mean, not to be reductive, but there are essentially two ways that you can deal with racism and homophobia,
Mm-hmm.
and all the isms in the world. You can either show it happening and indicate your disapproval,
Mm-hmm.
or you can depict a world in which it does not exist, and therefore model what you want the world to be. And I think, I think both are legitimate, but I think the first tactic, where you show the world as you believe it to be, and indicate your disapproval, there's so much room for misstep and misunderstanding. And there's also the argument that when you depict a homophobic, racist, transphobic, etc. world, a hierarchical world, you reify those structures. And if you depict a world as you would like to see it, you are actually moving closer to the goal, by making space in your readers' minds for that kind of world. So I'm trying to do this. I'm hoping to do this. And my love triangle trope with the woman and the two dudes, that's gonna queerify really fast if this
excellent
if this series continues. I've already planted the seeds. I hope you noticed. Already planted the seeds for that to go very queer very fast. And I myself have been benefited and freed. I'm cis, but I have been benefited and freed by the incredible hard work that trans and non-binary people have put into shaking us loose of this like incredibly strangling gender binary.
Absolutely.
And I really, really want that to infuse this world, and I want my characters to be freed of gender and sexual binaries, and I want my readers to be able to inhabit that kind of world as well.
Yeah. Oh, completely. It's always a very hopeful thing to read, as you say, the kind of world that we aspire to, that we hope will exist. And I think we all need a hopeful thing right now. Things are improving, but it's been a really tough time for a lot of people and continues to be a tough time for a lot of people. So it was great to step out of that and enter this chaotic, magical, hopeful world for a while. I think we've already answered this a little bit, but let's do our other listener question. We had a very excited reader write in, essentially demanding that there be more and asking, can you see yourself continuing Maya's story and making this into a series? And if so, how many would you imagine there to be?
So, yes, I absolutely would love to turn this into a series. I am already on book 2, full draft completed, but it needs
nice
work. So yeah. So I can see it going a bunch of different ways. One of the things is that I'm playing a bit with Chinese numerology, just a bit, very lightly. And the meanings of the numbers. Each book, I have I have the four books planned out, but ideas for more. And each of the books has a theme, and which relates to the number of the book. And of course, the Chinese lucky number is 8. So the most that would be this, the most books in the series would be 8. But it might not go that long. It's all very up in the air. It depends on a lot of factors. But yeah, I could go up to 8 or fewer. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, we definitely have a very excited listener who's going to be thrilled to hear that. And me, I'm this close to trying to get my hands on that draft, but I won't. But
Oh, you don't want to read it yet? It's not there yet.
When it is, I'm gonna need it. Ooh, okay. This is a little fun one that I always like to ask, largely because of my own obsession with playlisting things. Was there any particular music or that you listened to while you were writing, or any songs or music that remind you of the characters or the book?
Well, I don't listen to music when I'm writing because the surface of the language is very rhythmic to me, and I can't pay attention to it
Mm.
when I'm hearing music. Um, I I'll go to cafes sometimes, and if they're playing music, that's a boon because I have something to ignore. But um, so no, I wasn't listening to anything while I was writing this. But I have been putting together a playlist after the fact because, as we see in the book, Maya herself is a musician, and although not a very creative one, and and Todd is a musician, and Maya goes out to see shows quite a bit. So I have been putting together a Spotify playlist of songs that are appropriate to the story, and then also the types of musicians she would be listening to,
Mhm.
Bay Area and California and Asian American musicians of the time. I'm if the playlist turns out good, I might make it public.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm still working on it though.
Mm.
Although I will say that the first song on the playlist is "Somewhere" by Go Nakamura, which
Oh,
is
okay.
an awesome song.
Mm.
Um, and I just recorded a short reading for a local podcast with "Bulldozer" by the Invisible Cities as the backdrop for that, which is kind of a chaotic song that it reminds me
Yeah.
of Maya. And I think "Bizarre Love Triangle" by Jake Shimabukuro um, is the perfect Todd song because Todd who is an ukulele master, and he's somewhat based on Jake Shimabukuro, who's an uke maestro. So if you're going to listen to any song by Jake Shimabukuro, listen to "Bizarre Love Triangle" because that's sort of as oh, another person who informed Todd was the Hyphen magazine music editor, Todd Inouye, um, who isn't really like Todd at all, except that he shares the name and is also the magazine music editor. But as he put it, "Bizarre Love Triangle" is the Asian American national anthem. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to go check that out immediately. Let's talk a little bit about the setting of the story. It's very much rooted in real places. It's very much rooted in, it's a kind of a love story to San Francisco. Um, and the
Yeah.
city, I think it's fair to say, without being spoilery, the city really takes on its own character in the book.
Yes. Yes.
Um, was it important to you to ground the magic of the story in real locations and in a real space?
Absolutely, yes. Every location in the book except Sanka, which is the magical cafe, which does not exist, unfortunately.
That's a real
Every
shame.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to go to Sanka, but every location in the book except Sanka and Maya's apartment, and Maya's apartment is also based on a friend's apartment, but every other location is real and actually exists. Kearney Street Workshop, where she finds the first body in the second
Mhm.
chapter of the book, actually exists and is where I'm holding the launch party for the book. Um, and Yeah, the houseboat,
Mhm.
the houseboats where Moral the Nong is killed, where she lives and her body is found. That actually exists. There is one little houseboat boardwalk left in San Francisco. There are more in other parts of the Bay Area, but
Mm.
I think there's only one left in San Francisco, and it's still there. They built up all of the big high rises around it. Um, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's all there.
Mm.
Kite Hill exists, where Tez does his ritual.
Mhm.
That exists. All of it exists. It's all there. Yeah.
I'm feeling a when it's possible to do it again, I'm feeling a tourist trip coming on
Well, when you
where I
come to
just do
San
a walking
Francisco,
tour.
well, when you come, let me know. I'll take you on the monkey around tour.
That sounds amazing, and I will absolutely take you up on that. Do you have any tips for listeners who might want to start writing?
Oh, yeah. Tips for newbie writers. I would say get a notebook and a pen that you like and write by hand. There's
Mm-hmm.
something about writing by hand that makes your brain start to move.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Take it with you everywhere you go. Walk around and start observing. Make it a habit to take notes on everything that you see and hear that strikes your fancy and write it down. Take a lot of notes. Write down random stray thoughts, and just start collecting ideas. And good luck to you. And don't waste your time writing things that you think you're supposed to write. I did that. I
Mm.
wasted I wasted nearly a decade writing short stories when I'm not a short story person. If you want to write a novel, start writing a novel right now. If you want to write about Care Bears, start writing your Care Bear novel. If you want to write about werewolves, write about werewolves. If you want to write about spaceships, write about spaceships. If you want to write about cats, write about cats. Don't waste your time writing the story you think the world wants from you. Write the story you want to give the world. And that's it. I've got lots of advice, but that's all.
I think that's really good advice, and it's really powerful advice. I think we're all can be very tied to what we think the world wants from us and what we think the world expects from us. So to take a step away from that is a really valuable thing to do.
Do you write, Rosie?
I do. I do. I spent a long time trying to write some very literary fiction novel that really didn't feel like me. And I wrote the thing, and then I went back through and ripped about half out and realized what I was left with was something more like, I'm going to say chick lit, even though I hate it, but that's sort of, it really is. It's that sort of fun, romancy kind of fiction. But for me, it was really important that the protagonist doesn't have a classic happy ending. So doesn't end up with the guy or the girl, doesn't end up in a relationship, but finds a sense of themselves. So that's what I've been working on, but it's slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the happily ever after with yourself. I
Mhm.
love that. I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it will eventually be done and go
Yeah.
somewhere. But for now, I'm enjoying doing it. And I think that you can always tell, I think, when on the page somebody's enjoyed writing it. You can feel that, I think.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I look forward to seeing it when you're done.
Oh, I hope it is done one day. It will be. I have to have faith. I have to believe. But that's what they always say, isn't it? The difference between a published novelist and an unpublished one is one of them finished it.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of other differences too, and one of them is being able to see yourself finishing.
Mm.
Um, and the thing is, a lot of people are finished and don't realize it because they can't let go, or because they can't picture themselves as being finished. They can't believe that there's a world that exists in which they finished a book. You know, uh,
Mm. Oh, yeah.
there's so much that goes into there's so much self-confidence and self-awareness and um, self-idealization. And I wanted to put that on Maya as well, because she's got some mad imposter syndrome, but I see
Oh,
it
yeah.
all around me. I'm in a a marginalized creative community, and I'm surrounded by brilliant artists, brilliant writers who can't get out of their own way. um, So yeah, it's sort of what I've given my career to
Mm.
is being a kind of a creative doula for artists who have trouble getting out of their own way, partly because of social circumstances
Mm.
and socio-political circumstances. But so I wanted that to be apparent in Maya as well.
Mm.
Um, Although she's not an artist, she wants to be, but she's not.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's such a powerful thing, and she really does do that. I mean, she really is in as we progress more and more recognizing that part of herself, that where she's able to help people towards where they need to be or to guide people, and that seems to sit a little bit uncomfortably. Has trouble recognizing that in herself. I thought that was really interesting.
It's just as hard to see yourself as a leader as it is to see yourself as an artist.
Mm.
And that also requires a lot of confidence and a lot of being able to imagine yourself into the role in a world that doesn't imagine you in that role and
Yeah.
doesn't reflect that role back to you with yourself in it, you know.
Mm. Now I'm feeling like I need to believe in my writing more, but we'll park that for
Good,
right now.
good.
Do you have any recommendations for what somebody could read if they've read and loved Monkey Around?
Well, yes, absolutely. If you're looking for something similar, you're out of luck because I deliberately wrote something that did not exist. But fortunately for you and me, there are a lot of amazing books out there that hit one or more of the same spots that Monkey Around does. So if you're looking for Asian culture based fantasy, we're in a golden age of Asian culture based English language fantasy books. And my favorites right now are Fonda Lee's Greenbone Saga, which is amazing secondary world urban fantasy, which sounds weird, but it works. It works.
Oh, it does.
Secondary world is such a almost direct one for one analogy to sort of cultures and political situations in our world that it just works as an urban fantasy. Um, and let's see, what else have I read recently that I love? Oh, I love Zen Cho's Sorcerer to the Crown, R.F. Guang's Poppy War is harsh, but brilliant. Jeannie Lin's Gunpowder Chronicles, Asian World Steampunk and 19th century, and all right, well, I could go on, but Google Asian-based fantasy, and it's just everywhere. And then there's a lot of urban fantasy out there. The ones that I'm particularly, there's a series which I think was so controversial that I think it ended up, it might not be continued, but by Rebecca Roanhorse, the Sixth World series. She did 2 books in it. It's a Native American based urban fantasy, near future. I think it's wonderful, but I'm worried it's not going to continue. So we shall see. And let's see. There's another San Francisco based urban fantasy by Sarah Kuhn called Heroine Complex is the first book in the series. Asian American female superheroes in San Francisco. And now I'm forgetting everything. My mind is blanking. There is so much great fantasy out there right now. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think that's a very good list of recommendations. I'm definitely gonna go for, to begin with, the San Francisco based superheroes. Partly because I am now obsessed with all things San Francisco. I think there was something really, really fantastic about reading about real places right now, particularly when travel isn't really possible, certainly for a lot of people, and for people really here, or it's just starting to open up. So personally, I'm being very cautious about it. So it was
Yeah,
really
good,
nice to be
good for
taken
you.
away to somewhere else.
Yeah, and to be given, I'm very much enjoying going to other places and being given magical, like shadowy magical corners of other
Mm-hmm.
places as well. Yeah, that's very satisfying for
Mm,
me.
absolutely. And now Claire is going to treat us to a completely spectacular reading. Claire, take it away.
The book takes place during the Occupy Wall Street protests in October of 2011. And what folks may or may not know is that the that there wasn't an Occupy Wall Street encampment in San Francisco, but the one in Oakland, Occupy Oakland, was big,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very it was more radical in a lot of people's estimation than the original Occupy Wall Street. Um, so it was sort of its own thing. So Occupy Oakland was kind of a big deal around the Bay Area, and Maya gets in, even though Maya lives in San Francisco and works in Oakland, so she ends up getting involved with Occupy Oakland, which has a really large contingent of people of color,
Mm-hmm.
and who are working to sort of decolonize
Yeah.
the Occupy movement. So anyway, Maya's been involved in the Occupy movement, and in near the end of the book, the Occupy Oakland encampment, which is right downtown, right in the civic center of Oakland, is cleared by the police
Mm.
in a very ill-judged move by the then mayor, who was at the time an Asian American who came up through Asian American grassroots
Mm-hmm.
social justice organizing. And she angered her base terribly. But there was a really bad scene the night that they cleared the encampment, and the following day there was a protest. So here we are downtown the day after the encampment has been cleared, and Maya and her group have joined the protest. And that's where we are. So that's where I'm going to start reading. A few hours in, the sun had set, and we approached the plaza again. We were given the order to disperse. I felt our energy rise to meet the opposition. Monkey was a soldier for truth. All parts of my mind pointed at getting back into the plaza. And by the way, Maya has separates her different impulses in the different parts of her brain into the monkey brain and the rational brain. So when she says monkey, she's talking about the impulsive monkey side of herself. The cops had tear gas ready, gas masks on. Ordinarily, this would have concerned me. Any smoke makes my eyes burn in the wrong way. But then the word went down the line to wet a scarf with vinegar to fend off the tear gas, and bottles of vinegar were passed around, and that gave me an idea. Todd pulled an extra cloth for me out of his bag, but I plucked a hair and changed it into a respirator. He grinned, and Monkey grinned back. I pulled out another hair and made goggles for myself, then offered him a pair. He took them. I made Io a pair as well. I made a mental note to remember goggles in the future. Colorful protesters and black-suited cops boiled in the intersection. A line of clear plastic shields approached, order bearing down on chaos. After another warning, the cops began firing tear gas and lobbing flashbangs. Monkey screeched and jumped up and down in my head. Fucking cops. People began running in every direction, screams and imprecations thrown. I found myself automatically guarding Io. She wasn't that old, but she had some arthritis starting, and I saw Todd lift an arm to protect Mari. Or was that Jen? from a flying tear gas canister, but the canister cleared all of their heads. Monkey screeched angrily. A few yards away, tear gas flew. A white kid went down, and blood started streaming from his face. People dove in to help the injured protester, pulled him up and carried him out, screaming, "Medic!" The fucking cops stood in a line watching, throwing flashbangs, impassive, doing nothing to help. Suddenly my mood turned from righteous anger to hot rage. Monkey began screeching incessantly in my head. I couldn't stand down here any longer, doing nothing. They wanted mayhem, I'd show them mayhem. I shoved Io towards Todd, who was partially shielding both Mari and Jen, and cried, "Get them up past the line on 15th. "Where are you going?" he yelled back. I leaned in so only he could hear me. "I'm going up to get a better view." Io's eyes narrowed at me. "Maya," she started, but I was already gone, having used the smoke from the tear gas to cover the cloud I'd called down. Mari and Jen were watching the injured man being carried away, and Todd hustled them along after. I rose quickly above the level of the high rises, ripping my mask down at the first opportunity to breathe freely. The fresher air was like oxygen to a fire. The airspace above Ogawa Grant Plaza seemed completely socked in by police helicopters and haze. Bring them down. I considered growing my fists large and just walloping the birds until they fell. Fucking cops. Then, when a fucking cop goggled at me out a helicopter window, I realized that in my enraged, distracted state, I'd forgotten to go invisible. I corrected the omission, then stood back and glared at his craft. How to bring his chopper down fast. Fucking cops. I tried to track the fuel line, but had no idea where that would be on a helicopter, or any other vehicle for that matter, and couldn't be bothered to study it in my fury. Maybe I could snap off one of the propellers. For below, I could faintly hear, among the rest of the hullabaloo, Io's voice calling my name. She sounded a bit desperate. Maybe something was wrong. But I couldn't see her. I looked consideringly at the chopper again. It was rimmed in red. The cop pressed his face to the glass and his bug eyes scanned the air frantically for me. That was actually kind of funny. Monkey's screech turned into laughter. Fucking cop. I really wanted to make his eyes, I really wanted to fuck with this guy. I moved in and wrapped shave and a haircut on the window directly over his bewildered face. His eyes nearly popped out of his skull. While I scrabbled the air for the source of the sound, I flew under and around to the other side of the chopper and pounded 2 bits on the opposite window. He must have shat his pants. Hilarious. The rest of the chopper's inhabitants were starting to cop to the strangeness and look around, puzzled. Cop to, get it? I screeched with laughter, not caring if they heard. I flew over to the next chopper and considered. Idea. I pulled out a hair and turned it into an invisible bullhorn, which I placed directly against the glass and, in a booming, sepulchral voice, shouted, "The roof! The roof! The roof is on fire!" Instant mini pandemonium. Wild eyes looking around, guns pulled out. Ha! I flew under and up to the other side and placed the bullhorn against the opposite window. "Let the motherfucker burn!" I loosed at the perfect moment. Major freak out. One cop even had to stop another one from firing through the ceiling. I sat down on my cloud and gave into a severe bout of guffaws. While Monkey was enjoying herself and feeling the sudden rage blow off, my rational mind was able to insert a slim finger. Maybe, just maybe, scaring the crap out of cops who'd been out here for 16 hours and had already started injuring protesters wasn't the best idea. Io, where was Io? Where were Mari and Jen and the rest of my crew? I stuck my head over the edge of the cloud. I didn't see them immediately in the chaos of darkness, but then I remembered and scanned the mayhem at speed for there, up near 15th Street, a burning flash. That must be Todd. I landed next to him and waited for a cloud of tear gas to blow past, to drop the invisibility. "Maya," Mari shrieked. Jen grabbed my arm. "Where have you been?" Io cried, distressed. "What did you do?" Todd asked, eyes shining. Io grabbed my arm and pulled me away from Mari and Jen and the handful of others who'd collected. Todd followed. What did you do? She hissed. I told them. Io huffed. Todd guffawed. It's not funny, Io said to Todd. The last thing we need is someone provoking the cops. And Io brings some calm to the situation, and that's the end of that scene.
Oh, that's got to be. I'm not going to commit to my favorite, but it's got to be really up there. One of my favorite scenes in the whole book. It's yeah. Thank you so much for reading that. Really, I felt that was for me, but thank you on behalf of everybody.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a complete pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. That was really fun.
I'm really glad. And that is our show. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. Bringing you this is the highlight of my month, and I hope you really enjoyed listening to this episode. If you haven't already seen on our social media, our next book club pick is The Lyre of Red Valley, and my next guest is its author, Walter Goodwater. I'll look forward to chatting to him and to all of you again next month, and in the meantime, happy reading!